Hey there, friends. It's David Lightbringer, and we are here with part 2 of our red pilling of the Dance of the Dragons, the Targaryen Civil War, whose major events comprise the story that will be told on HBO's House of the Dragon, of course. And part 1, we discussed, what appears to be, the fact that what appears to be a vicious and bloody power struggle between rival factions of House Targaryen may, in fact, be the end result of a long-running Maester conspiracy to reduce the power of House Targaryen, kill off their dragons, and eventually remove them from power altogether. George plants the idea in the mind of the reader through the words of Marwyn the Mage, which I read, of course, the apostate Archmaester, one of my favorite characters. He directly implies the conspiracy, even sarcastically quipping to Sam, "Who do you think killed all the dragons the last time around?" As if that were an obvious thing that everyone should know. Then in Book 5, A Dance with Dragons, of course, George gives us the conspiratorial musings / rantings of Lady Barbary of House Dustin, a.k.a. Bloodthirsty Babs, as I have named her, who wants to kill all the Grey Rats. The Maesters are the Grey Rats, of course, and she believes the Maesters are no more than, of course, insidious agents of a secretive Old Town power play, and specifically, she's suggesting that the Maesters were the ones to suggest the marriage alliances between Stark, Tully, Baratheon, Arryn, and Lannister, which created the power base that brought down King Aerys II Targaryen. Thus, we have the beginnings of the shape of a conspiracy, an anti-dragon, anti-Targaryen conspiracy, one that begins with provoking a Targaryen civil war as a means of killing off the dragons and as many heirs as possible, and ends with the overthrow of King Aerys II, potentially a 200-year running conspiracy, 180-year running conspiracy, something like that. So having outlined the mechanisms, the shape, the motivations in part 1, it's now time to take a mirrorless lens, or Morpheus sunglasses, as it may be, and the light of truth to the specific events of the dance, which led up to the dance. That's what we're going to look at today, the stuff that led up to the dance. So click the thumbs up, friends. And yes, this is a live stream. It's a scripted live stream, but essentially I was writing a script for part 2 of this video, and it got too long. It would have been like a 45, 50-minute video, and there's not really pictures for most of this stuff. And it would have taken me a month to make it. So I figured I would just go ahead and present it live, because actually this will be a good interactive topic. We're going to go through all the events that are suspicious, and I'm going to read you the evidence, the key lines, and we're going to rate everything on a 10 pyramid scale, essentially. I've got my ratings already written down, but I will offer each event to you guys, and you can tell me how suspicious you think it is. And of course, you can use the super chat function or the PayPal link, which is linked below, to both support the program and chime in with evidence that you think I may have missed. Because I know a lot of people have done work on this Maester conspiracy. Preston Jacobs, I know, has a big series. I have not watched anyone else's material on this. I'm just not something I had ever really been interested in until House of the Dragon. And now I am digging into it. And I figured I would do my own research, then circle back and see what everyone else found. I have no doubt that I've missed some things that other people may have found. But the point is, you can chime in if there's any evidence that I've missed as I'm reading through the different events. So yes, highly participatory. And I've got all the quotes recorded ahead of time so that I can give my dear voice a tiny break, and also so that it's prepared and stuff like that. That's where I'll have the artwork too. I'll have artwork during the quote reads. And the rest of the time, I'm going to be showing you my lovely face and reading from the script. We got the chat on the left, so you can see what the discussion's about. And I've got one pink bird on my shoulder. Throw the Cleo emojis in the chat. Well-groomed, well-preened parrot here. But yes, this will be a scripted live stream, so not a Q&A live stream, but we're going to charge right through this. And I've, like I said, I've been preparing this thing. It would have been a produced video, but it just would have taken like a month of my time to make. And I don't know that the interest in the Maester conspiracy is that much of a raging fire. But the first video, you guys did watch it and comment, and you liked it. So here we are. This is one of my favorites. Quickly becoming one of my favorite topics. Like I said, I kind of didn't get into it. I got lost in symbolism and mythology for like 6 years. But now we're digging into the conspiracies and stuff. Come here, go. Here, why don't we put you on the monitor so I can concentrate? There you go, girl. All right. So welcome everyone watching live and watching after the fact. And as I began to explain last time, the first challenge in reviewing the evidence of such a conspiracy is that the evidence we have is literally authored by the potential conspirators, of course. The accounts of the Dance of the Dragons that we read in Fire and Blood were compiled by the Maesters, and they come from 3 first-hand sources, with the primary source being a Maester, a Grand Maester, Runseter, and Melos a little bit. The second source is also from Old Town. That would be Septon Eustace. Shout out to Eustace from Chronicles of Narnia, who wrote the sober and ponderous history tome known as The Reign of King Viserys, first of his name, and The Dance of the Dragons that came after. That's the title. The Reign of King Viserys, first of his name, and The Dance of the Dragons that came after. Yes, so it's a ponderous title for a ponderous tome, it would appear. And let me just go ahead and finish my tea off here. I think we are steeped. I just need to add a little honey and set this to the side here. There we go. Local honey, of course, boosts the immune system. You guys know about that. We've turned into a health show. No, I'm kidding. Nice, gooey local honey. All right. So we've got Runseter, we've got Eustace, and then the last source, of course, is the famous Mushroom, whose self-titled album is called The Testimony of Mushroom. And added to this are later accounts of children and grandchildren of the people involved. So essentially what we have here is a nice grab bag of sources that the Maesters compiling the work can pick and choose from and use to present certain ideas as more or less credible. We don't know for sure that they did that, but going with Archmaester Marwyn's premise of a conspiracy, this is what they had to work with. So that's the first thing, is understanding Fire and Blood is itself a piece of evidence. It is Exhibit A, if you will. And we have many exhibits labeled by letter to bring to you today. Let's see if this is too hot or not. Oh yeah, it's too hot. Oh, that's not too bad. I'll try not to do too much tea sipping ASMR. I know not everyone loves that. Okay, so we got Mushroom, we got those 3 sources, and we've also got a super chat from Melissa Moore. Thank you, Melissa. So it says, finally the Maesters themselves add the caveat, or at least they say, quote, much of what happened in the years that followed happened behind closed doors, in the privacy of stairwells, council rooms, and bedchambers, and the full truth of it will likely never be known. And that is true. This is one of the reasons why House of the Dragon is going to be so much fun for the showrunners and for George to adapt, because for each major event, there's a variety of potential truths presented from which they can choose. So I've called it a choose your own adventure, but essentially they can fashion an actual truth that we'll be able to see how it gives rise to different versions or different perspectives of the event. So it's a little bit of a fun house of reality trying to pick through Fire and Blood, and that is part of the sport. That's what makes it so much more interesting than just a regular sort of coffee table world book type thing. So although we don't know how far back, okay, so first suspicious event will be the deaths of Prince Aemon and Prince Baelon. And this starts all the way back in the reign of King Jaehaerys. That's how far the conspiracy goes. Now, we don't really know where it starts, but the first events that look to me like they're involved, they're the ones that directly led to the succession crisis that preceded the dance. And those were the deaths of Prince Aemon Targaryen in 92 AC and Prince Baelon in 101 AC. And they were known as the heir and the spare. Initially, they made everyone feel very secure about the future of the kingdom. Now, both of them died in the woods, the notorious abattoir of the gods, as Varys calls it. In fact, listen to this quote from Varys, which comes very close to naming both the reported causes of death of Aemon and Baelon while he's discussing the cause of King Robert's death in the woods with Lord Eddard Stark. And here's our first. This will be Exhibit A. Oh, indeed. Cersei gave him the wineskins and told him it was Robert's favorite vintage. The eunuch shrugged. A hunter lives a perilous life. If the boar had not done for Robert, it would have been a fall from a horse, the bite of a wood adder, an arrow gone astray. The forest is the abattoir of the gods. It was not wine that killed the king. It was your mercy. So Varys, of course, means that Ned's mercy killed Robert, in that Ned showed Cersei mercy when he should have arrested her, and left free to roam, she then was able to arrange Robert's death. Now, as to Aemon and Baelon, Aemon was, it's Aemon, no D, Aemon. Prince Aemon, he was in fact killed in the woods by an arrow gone astray, and that's one of the things that Varys just listed. It was a stray crossbow bolt on Tarth that took Aemon while he was helping to fight off an incursion of Myrish renegades turned pirates. All mere men are basically just one step away from being pirates, as we know. So the Maesterly account in Fire and Blood tells us that Prince Aemon had flown on Caraxes to meet with Lord Cameron Tarth, who had, quote, established a camp in a hidden valley from which he could look down on the Myrish movements below. Unfortunately, Exhibit B from Fire and Blood. The Evenstar's camp was not as well hidden as he had hoped, and the smoke from the dragon's fires drew the eyes of a pair of Myrish scouts who were creeping through the heights unawares. One of them recognized the Evenstar as he strode through the camp at dusk, talking with Prince Aemon. Rising, he took aim on the Evenstar 100 yards below and loosed his bolt. Dusk and distance made his aim less certain, and the bolt missed Lord Cameron and struck Prince Aemon standing at his side. The iron bolt punched through the prince's throat and out the back of his neck. Unfortunately, the Evenstar's camp is not as well hidden as he had hoped. Yes, well, how the Maesters writing this knew that the Mere Men were meaning to hit the Lord of Tarth and hit Aemon by mistake, well, we'll never know. And though it's possible the Mere Scouts just found the hidden camp and the two most important people in it by chance, it's also possible that someone told them just where to go and just whom to kill. Prince Aemon was hit in the throat, which is an awfully lucky strike for an errant crossbow bolt, right? It sounds more like a direct hit on the intended target. And that's exactly what Varys was implying when he said that Robert might have been killed by an arrow gone astray if the boar and the strong wine hadn't done the trick. Thus, this is one of the most suspicious events leading up to the war. And so, guys, what do you think? Out of a 10 pyramid scale, what would you call this? Let me see in the chat. On a scale of 1 to 10 pyramids, I'm calling this an 8 out of 10. It would be a 7 out of 10, except because there's no specific link from the Maesters to the Mere Men. We just have to suppose that they did that. It's very fishy looking. But for the sake of it being specifically mentioned by Varys in his list of 5 ways to commit regicide in the woods and get away with it speech, that gives it an extra point to me. So I'm calling that an 8 out of 10. And we'll get to accidentally falling off your horse in a minute. So I've got to see see a 9, 8. It's definitely very fishy. There's mirror men involved, so of course it's fishy. Cinnabarb doesn't think it's fishy at all. She says it's a 3. Yeah, I'm seeing 7 to 9. Isabel calls this a 10. It's pretty damn fishy. It's pretty damn fishy. So moving on to Aemon's younger brother, Prince Baelon, who is now the heir to the throne. Well, he wasn't killed by the bite of a wood adder, which is what Varys talked about, but he was maybe poisoned in the woods, which is kind of similar, although, of course, snakes and all such animals have venom, not poison. I think I screwed that up in my world-famous smash hit Ice Spiders video, which everyone has watched and upvoted and commented on, but I digress. In 101 AC, some 9 years after Aemon's death, Baelon the Spring Prince complained of a stitch in his side while on a hunting trip, then had his belly swell and harden after he returned to King's Landing, and ultimately he died 5 days later of a burst belly. At least burst belly is the cause of death put down by the new Grand Maester Runcitor, who treated Baelon and opened his body after his death. So the obvious question here is, did someone slip something in his wine while he was out hunting, which would potentially mirror Robert's death, where he was given strong wine in place of regular wine? So it's slightly different to be poison in the wine, but similar. Was Grand Maester Runcitor, who arrived from Old Town only months before Baelon's death, was he part of the plot? Might he have hidden the evidence of poisoning during his, when they cut open the dead body? Autopsy, thank you, autopsy. Did he hide the evidence in the autopsy? Did he falsify the report? Or was this simply a burst appendix? We'll never know, but these two deaths definitely directly lead to the Council of 101 AC, which itself is one of the most suspicious events in this whole thing. So I'd probably call Baelon's death 5 out of 10 pyramids. You guys tell me what you think, but it looks like it could be foul play, and the change in Grand Maester is suspicious. There is a motivation there, but this could very easily be a naturally occurring death that just couldn't be prevented with medieval healthcare. So there's really not enough evidence to come to a hard conclusion here, but only we can say that it fits a larger pattern of deaths. And if there is a conspiracy and you're trying to get to this great council, then the Baelon death is something you need to happen. So it's either a burst appendix or poison. I called it a 5 out of 10, but you guys tell me what you think. So Cinnabarb, you called this one a 10, but the last one a 3? So you think Aemon being struck in the neck with a crossbow bolt is not suspicious, but this one is suspicious. I guess it just goes to show everyone's got a different take on this stuff, but in any case, I think the main evidence for that one is just the fact that it led to the council. There's no specific evidence because the maesters treat everyone. That's the thing. They treat everyone who's sick. They treat every woman who's in childbirth that potentially dies in childbirth. The maesters are always there. So it's just, it always leaves the possibility open that they could be involved, but we can't say the maesters did it just because they were there, because they're always there when someone is sick or injured. So it's just one of those things. That's why they're in a good position to pull off conspiracies. But Baelon was directly seen by the maesters before he died. But again, that would be anybody who was injured. So, yeah, it could be either one. Like I said, there's just a lack of specific evidence. So, now the next event, this is kind of one of the meatiest things here. We're going to talk about the Great Council of 101 AC, but also Sir Otto Hightower being named as Hand, because that happened right before all of this. So they're kind of part of the same event. Anyways, thanks for joining me, guys. You see why this is a fun one. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this on a live stream. It's like, this is fun to debate. I figured you guys would get into it in the chat and mix it up and go back and forth, and I'm sure you guys will catch a couple things that I didn't too, so I figured this would be the best way to do it. But in any case, we are now to the Great Council of 101 AC, and many seeds of war were sown there. The council was held shortly after Baelon's death to determine who would become the heir to Jaehaerys, who had grown very old and frail by then, and he would actually die only 2 years later in 103 AC. Now, Jaehaerys had just appointed Otto Hightower to the office of Hand of the King to replace Baelon, because Baelon was not only the prince, he was also the Hand of the King. And for a while, they coupled those offices, with the idea being that, you'd have the heir to the throne serve as Hand, so he could train running the realm. And that way, when he took over as king, he would already be intimately familiar with just how everything works and stuff. So Baelon was Hand and Prince, but he appointed Sir Otto to replace Baelon. He decided to split the offices. He said, okay, Otto's going to be the Hand, and we'll figure out who's going to be the heir at this council. So the thing is that because Jaehaerys was old, Sir Otto effectively ruled the realm once he showed up. Baelon had been running things before then. Jaehaerys is not a hands-on king at this point. So that means that Old Town effectively slid two of their people into the most powerful offices around Jaehaerys, Hand of the King and Grand Maester, because Rhaenyra just arrived, remember, right at the end of his life, right when Jaehaerys was more dependent on advice than ever, and right when the succession issue, try to say that 5 times fast, had suddenly been thrown into question. So this is very fishy, right? All of a sudden, this old king is surrounded by Old Town, new people from Old Town, Sir Otto and Rhaenyra. Now, if you want to isolate the choosing of Sir Otto as Hand, that's basically a 9 out of 10 pyramids, because Jaehaerys was borderline senile. He was starting to go senile at this point. So there's no way that he would have named Sir Otto by himself. That would have been a suggestion someone made to him, probably Rhaenyra or other advisors. So Sir Otto becoming the Hand is like a big part of the whole conspiracy. If there's a conspiracy, this is definitely part of it. So I call this 9 out of 10, Sir Otto being named Hand. Let's see here. I've got a super chat from Smith Crazy, and I'm going to have to disappoint you a little bit here. As saying, you and Joe Magician and In Deep Geek can get together at some point. He's hoping we can get together and debate viewpoints. So Joe Magician and I are not friends. I'm not going to go into that, but we are not friends. There's a lack of respect, and there's a good amount of bad blood. And that's I'm not going to go into it, but you will never see me and Joe Magician working together. And In Deep Geek, I do have a lot of respect for. However, he kind of does his own thing. So I don't know that we'll be collaborating anytime soon. And yeah, I think In Deep Geek has a very different sort of approach than I do. So, check out his stuff on his channel for sure. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I haven't heard from In Deep Geek in a while. Like I said, it seems like he's just doing his own thing. Now, I will be having Gray Area on as soon as I can. She's super busy. It's hard to get her, but she said she'd come on some point. I just talked to Tony Teflon the other day. He said he's happy to come on, so I might have him on sometime soon. And definitely going to have Girl Nettles back on as well. But yeah, sorry to disappoint you. You'll just have to consume their content on their channels, and yeah. Let's see here. I just don't want to dance around the fact, like, yeah, me and Joe are not, we're not friends. We had a falling out. It happens. It's all right. He does do good work. I will say that. He does do good work. So here we are with Otto being named Hand. And this could be another point in favor of Baelon's death having been foul play, since this is what allowed Otto to be named Hand, right? Like, they killed Baelon. If they killed Baelon, they killed him knowing that Jaehaerys was old and that they could influence him on who the new Hand would be. So you could almost look at Baelon Baelon's death as part of Otto being placed in his hand. But in any case, what you can see is essentially Old Town struck when Jaehaerys was losing touch with reality and had lost all his friends. And also, let's not forget that Otto's daughter, Alicent Hightower, who's 16 or 15 at the time, also worked her way close to Jaehaerys, or was placed close to Jaehaerys. I've got an Alicent video coming out next week to talk about that in detail, so I won't go into that now. But Alicent is there as well, feeding and dressing and helping to bathe Jaehaerys. Mushrooms suggest there was hanky-panky going on. We don't know if that's true, but the point is Jaehaerys is quite literally surrounded by Old Town. It's completely surrounded. And that's not unlike King Robert found himself surrounded by Lannisters at court, after Jon Arryn died. And you remember when he came to Winterfell, that's one thing he talked about. Like, these damnable Lannisters. I'm surrounded by them. So this is the same for Jaehaerys at this point. He's surrounded by Hightowers and other Old Town allies. Yeah, and when I say Jaehaerys was alone, Alysanne had just died a few years ago. Septon Barth died a few years ago. The Grand Maester before Runseter was a good friend of Jaehaerys. He died. So basically, once Baelon and Aemon are gone, he's just lost the 5 people that are closest to him. His wife, Septon Barth, the Grand Maester, and his 2 sons, his strong, right and left hand princes. So all of those people have been taken from Jaehaerys within a few years, and all of a sudden he's surrounded by motherfuckers from Old Town. So that's what's happening here. I just want to paint that picture. So Jaehaerys, like I said, he didn't know Runseter or Sir Otto very well. And so, the previous Grand Maester was Alar. Sorry, that's what his name was, Alar. But he was a good friend of Jaehaerys and a trusted advisor. So, faced with this most pressing crisis of succession, Jaehaerys got the idea that, he should find someone that he trusts to advise him. He doesn't know about all these new people. So he's like, my son Vaegon, who's an Archmaester at the Citadel. Wow. That's right. Jaehaerys probably figured that Vaegon would have his best interests in mind, being family, but Vaegon had always been extremely cold and distant from his family since leaving to Old Town, being sent to Old Town at age 15, which he was happy about. So there's no doubt that Vaegon would have adopted the mindset of the Conclave by this time. He's aged 38, so he's been training as a Maester for 22 years. So that's where the loyalty is going to lie, is to the Maesters. And it was Vaegon's idea to call the Great Council, which in turn directly leads to the Dance of the Dragons as much as any single event does. So Fire and Blood tells us that some say that Jaehaerys actually offered the throne to Vaegon to make him the heir. But that doesn't make any sense to me, and I think this is something that's just thrown in to throw us off. So Vaegon is a uniquely horrible candidate. So check this out. Here's the quote from Fire and Blood. This will be Exhibit C. Known to history as Vaegon the Dragonless, his very existence had been largely forgotten by most of the 7 kingdoms. Though only 40 years of age, Vaegon was pale and frail, a bookish man devoted to alchemy, astronomy, mathematics, and other arcane arts. Even as a boy, he had never been well liked. Few considered him a viable choice to sit the Iron Throne. So there you go. Obviously not somebody that was ever a serious candidate to be king. So I think this is just to obscure the fact that he was called into King's Landing to give advice, and that's what he did. So it's just a little extra something. There's a few examples where the Maesters throw in little extra tidbits to sort of just throw us off. But yeah, Vaegon, people are speculating maybe he's got antisocial disorder or something like that. He's definitely written as somebody like that. He's kind of a loner. Like they say, Vaegon, he's not going to be a good Maester, taking care of the sick and giving advice and counseling people in grief, but he would be a good Archmaester. So he's basically just an intellectual He's an ivory tower intellectual, not a lot of empathy, very sort of just disconnected, very in his own head. So now, so he doesn't have dragons, he doesn't have children, doesn't have a base of power, isn't well liked. So not a realistic thing here. And the real truth is that Jaehaerys is making the decision to call the Great Council while completely surrounded by Old Town power. The Grand Maester, an Archmaester, and Sir Otto Hightower, and Alicent Hightower. So at the Great Council, a specific legislative body is created. That's the Great Council from which the event takes its name. This council was made up of High Lords of the Realm, plus, it says here, the Maesters of Old Town, and the Septas and Septas to speak for the faith. So the voices of the High Lords were watered down by not one, but two Old Town factions. And of course, each High Lord would also have been getting their personal counsel from their own personal Maester. Your own personal Maester. Someone to kill off the heirs and dragons in pairs. Reach out and touch chains. There you go. I've been working on that all week. Thank you. Thank you. I even learned the guitar riff on bass. Maybe I'll make a music video at some point. Yeah. Why not? Your own personal Maester. So yes, they're watering down the advice of the High Lords. They are advising the High Lords. Their fingerprints are all over this damn thing. Now, we know almost nothing about the details of how the proceedings were conducted. The Maesterly account in Fire and Blood is pretty damn vague, to be honest. We're told that the council deliberated for 13 days, and that the tenuous claims of 9 lesser competitors were considered and discarded, but we're not told how that was decided, or who spoke for or against anything, or just any sort of detail. Then we're told that Rhaenys and her daughter Laena were rejected because of their gender, but again, not who was in favor and who wasn't, how close that issue was, or anything. How it was determined, it just says they were rejected because of their gender. That's it. Then it says, finally it comes down to the... Excuse me, hang on a second. So finally, guys, it comes down to... At least the narrative says that it comes down to a choice between Viserys and Laenor Velaryon, with Viserys being the clear choice. And this passage is very, very suspicious. So may I present to you Exhibit D. Though Lord and Lady Velaryon were eloquent and open-handed in their efforts on behalf of their son, the decision of the Great Council was never truly in doubt. By a lopsided margin, the Lords assembled chose Viserys Targaryen as the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. Though the maesters who tallied the votes never revealed the actual numbers, it was said afterward that the vote had been more than 20 to 1. Count the vote. Count the vote. Sorry, I snuck in a quick bite there. Went light on the lunch today. Yes, we're very professional. So, stop the count. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was tempted to clip pictures of the Brooks Brothers riot, for those of you who know what that is, but I didn't want to send the chat spiraling with real-world politics. So there you go. Hashtag count the vote. Save it for Twitter, exactly. Is it true that the decision was never really in doubt? That's the question. I mean, was the margin lopsided? They say it was, but we have no idea, frankly. We only know that that's what people believed. It says that Corlys was persuaded from pressing the matter further, because of course he had been massing warships before this. And it said that he was persuaded out of pressing the matter further, specifically because of the lopsided margin. But the margin was never revealed, so there's a little bit of tension between those two ideas. I mean, how was a lopsided margin used to convince House Velaryon and Baratheon to stand down if it was never revealed? It's a good question, right? So the part of Fire and Blood concerns that concerns the Great Council also contains no references to any other sources. So it's literally just the Maester's word on the history here. I mean, why reveal the actual vote tally when you can just spread rumors about it, right? So, in other words, what's in the box, fellas? You know, someone needs to demand a recount. I, Corlys Velaryon, demand a recount. That's what I would say. And there's one final note, guys. Jaehaerys was not at Harrenhal for the Great Council. And of course, he's very old and frail, so he didn't make the trip. And that means that the actual council was conducted by the Maesters. And in all likelihood, probably Archmaester Vaegon and Grand Maester Runciter, maybe a little Sir Otto thrown in. So who was there protecting Targaryen royal interests? Normally that would have been the hand of the king, but the hand was Sir Otto Hightower. So who was keeping an eye on the Maesters? The answer is no one. Literally, nobody. Daemon was there, but he's only 20 at this time, and he's there to support the claim of Baelon. Or, I'm sorry, his brother Viserys, not Baelon. Their father is Baelon. He had been hand of the king. He's dead, so he's not protecting the interests of the crown. Prince Aemon is dead. Alicent is gone. Jaehaerys is old and absent. Rhaenys, the queen who never was there, but she would have been concerned with her own candidacy and that of her son Laenor. So she's not going to be placed in a position to oversee the Maesters. So basically, there were no Targaryens there to represent the crown. And when the dragons are away, the gray sheep will play. All right, we've got a super chat from Anu's travel blog. He says that he watched Preston's videos on Tar genetics and went over the lineage. And he now believes the Maesters have uncovered basic Mendelian genetics and that they manipulated votes to decrease the frequency of X-linked Valyrian dragon traits. Okay, so I did watch this. This is one of Preston's old theories, that the ability to hatch dragons is passed down on the maternal line, and that if you go back in the family tree, you can sort of see why they lost the ability to hatch dragons or something like that. It's a pretty good theory. I do like it. It doesn't go overly deep into genetics, like beyond the point where a fantasy author would think about it. So I'm down with this as a viable theory. So you're saying that essentially the Maesters could have come up upon this, and part of their purpose in arranging for certain assassinations or marriages would have been to breed out the dragon hatching gene. That's an interesting theory, so I'll have to talk to you about that later, Anu. Anu is my number one source for real-world history, of course, so, you know, we chat from time to time. Thanks, that's a good one, Anu, appreciate that. And that does kind of make sense. So yeah, I'll have to check out Preston's commentary on the conspiracy itself to see how he's linked those together and see what I think of it. And yeah, Anu, you can drop the link to that video in the chat if you want. You are a moderator, so you should be able to drop links. Okay, so back to the lecture at hand. There's no Targaryens looking after the Maesters. The Great Council is there, completely their manufacturing. It is their doing. But the thing is, it may be that we don't need a conspiracy to explain what happened here, because one main reason, it's very obviously possible that the High Lords of Westeros were fairly united, that only a man could inherit the throne, simply because a lot of those lords would have had older sisters who could have laid claim to the lordship of their house based on the precedent of Rhaenys, had they made Rhaenys the heir. So that may just be the political system and patriarchy and not a conspiracy at all. Now it says the final choice between Viserys... It says the final choice between Viserys and Laenor I keep saying it says. I'm reading my own script. Sorry, guys. So the maesters say that the final choice comes down to Viserys and Laenor. And it does seem obvious when you're picking between those two. Laenor is only 7, and Viserys is 24. And regent kings are very dangerous. A 7-year-old king means a regency for like another 7, 8 years. That's dangerous for everyone. So it's very understandable that they chose Viserys over Laenor. But the real choice was between Viserys and Rhaenys, the queen who never was, really. And that's why I'm slightly suspicious of this narrative, which mentions that Princess Rhaenys and her daughter's claims are dismissed on account of their gender, almost as an aside, before drawing our attention to the final decision between Viserys and Laenor, almost as if they wanted to downplay the dismissal of Rhaenys. They're like, oh yeah, well, they were set aside because of their gender anyway. So it might have been a closer issue than they want people to think. That's what I'm wondering. That vote could have been very close for all we know. And why would they mention the dismissal of her daughter Laena's claim? Because Laena's claim would obviously come after Rhaenys' claim. It comes from Rhaenys. So it's completely superfluous to mention Laena having a claim to the throne. She's even younger. Or no, she's not. She's older than Laenor, but she's going to be like 9. So yeah, this seems like an extra detail thrown in to obscure the elimination of the best candidate, which was clearly Rhaenys. So overall, I'm going to call this, what do you guys think? Grade Council, how many pyramids out of 10? I'm going to call this 7.5 to 8. It really does stink to high heaven. I'd like to call it a 10 out of 10. I mean, the final tally was never revealed. Like, what else do you want? No one would ever accept that in an election today. Of course, it'd be very obvious that it was rigged. And at the same time, the idea that the High Lords decided in favor of male primogeniture, it requires no conspiracy, like I said. And for all we know, there may have been neutral parties observing the vote counting, and it just wasn't mentioned in the narrative. So, bottom line, we will have to watch this event very closely. We know it's going to be on the show. We've already seen the 2 shots of it from the show. 1,000 out of 10. Yeah, like I said, the only mitigating factor is the fact that you could explain this with the male primogeniture argument. But other than that, yes, it stinks to high heaven. The maesters are running it. The vote's never revealed. So, yes, the chat thinks I'm being too careful here. But I tried not to go just 10 out of 10 on everything, you know. But the bottom line is we're just going to have to watch on the show. We'll have to see. This will be one of those scenes early on in the show that we watch to see if there's any signs of a conspiracy, to see if the show is even doing this plot line, which I think they should. It would just make the show a lot more interesting. It's an entire different angle on the entire thing. Otherwise, it's just a struggle between these 2 factions. If the maesters are involved, it makes it kind of a triangle. So we'll just have to see if we see any signs of skullduggery, you know, vote counting, weirdness, or whisperings, or just anything. It's going to be one of those ones where you got to watch every scene the maesters are in when they get to the Great Council. So, yep, it looks like the chat is on a 10 out of 10 after this. I'm sticking to 8 out of 10 just because, like I said, it can be explained without the conspiracy. But this is the centerpiece. Basically, if there is a conspiracy, this is definitely part of it. So 9 out of 10, whatever. I don't know. Now, after Jaehaerys dies in 103, and there's no real reason to suspect foul play there. Jaehaerys has been in failing health for some time. He's pretty old. You know, he's being taken good care of by Alicent. So, I mean, let's not accuse a 15-year-old of regicide, please. That's just unthinkable, people. I won't have that. So in any case, Viserys I, he takes the throne after Jaehaerys dies in 103. Now, Viserys is a bit of an absentee king right from the start, it should be noted. And perhaps this is why the maesters steered the Great Council towards him, if indeed they did that. And here is exhibit, I guess this will be D, right? No, E. Yes. Exhibit E, folks.
Meanwhile, the tedium of rule was left largely to the king's small council and his hand. Sir Otto Hightower had continued in that office, serving the grandson as he had the grandsire. An able man, all agreed, though many found him proud, brusque, and haughty.
Oh, that was a short one. All right. So this is great for Otto and the Old Town faction, right? I mean, from Jaehaerys, a king vulnerable to manipulation because of his age and isolation, to Viserys, a king who's easy to manipulate by way of his naivete, weakness, and lack of certain political skills like perceptiveness, discernment, skepticism, etc. So, I mean, the fact that the Viserys, he keeps the same guy on his hand just shows that he was likely manipulated in his very first choice. You know, because to use a sports analogy, when a new general manager is hired onto a team, they usually are going to want to hire their own coaches, bring in their own people. You very rarely see a new coach or GM come in and keep the old, other coaches and stuff. Like, you're going to want to clean house, bring in your own people, so everyone's rowing in the same direction, if you will. So Viserys coming on and keeping the same hand, it just shows like he's not somebody that was thinking about, marking out his own power or anything like that. He's just like, yeah, this seems cool. We'll just roll with that. So it's almost tempting to go ahead and add another point to the Great Council pyramid count, because you can see how well the results of the affair turned out for Old Town. I mean, they were on a timeline headed for another strong Targaryen kingship in either Aemon or Baelon, and instead, they created a world where a young and inexperienced Viserys became king without any of the previous generation of Targaryens around to advise him. No parents, no uncles, no older siblings. He does have his one aunt, Rhaenys, but she was largely alienated from Viserys in King's Landing by the choice of the Great Council, which may have been part of the point. So, in place of any true dragons, Viserys only has Sir Otto, Grand Maester Rhaenyra, and then hang on. Sometimes when I say Viserys...
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
The computer thinks I'm talking to its personal assistant, whose name is contained within the name of the Targaryen king, which we're discussing. Oh boy. Okay. In a world. So they did a bit of timeline hopping. Instead of King Aemon or King Baelon, they've now got King Viserys. Like I said, he's isolated. His only advisors, instead of older Targaryens who would teach him how to be a true dragon. And remember, Viserys doesn't even have a dragon. He bonded with Balerion, rode him once, and then Balerion was dead, and then he didn't get another dragon. So instead of any dragons to advise him, he has Sir Otto, Grand Maester Rhaenyra, then Grand Maester Mellos, and maybe Archmaester Vaegon if he wants to call him up again. Now, there was, however, one true dragon in a position to advise Viserys in a direction that the Maesters didn't like. And that man was, of course, Daemon Targaryen. Dun dun dun. So let's talk about the feud between Viserys and Daemon. Come here, girl. Yes, let's. But not before I play some funky music for y'all, so I can do something real quick. I gotta find it though. Oh, geez. Let's see. There it is. Sorry, guys. Just drank a lot of liquids today. Had to sneak a break in there. Appreciate the enjoyment of my funky Game of Thrones theme. And if you're new to the channel, yes, that is the old Game of Thrones theme, funked up a little bit. And as soon as they give us a new House of the Dragon theme, you can bet I will dial up my cousin Jamie, the Hands of Soul, and we will get a new funky theme going on. But let us talk about the feud between Viserys and Daemon. And honestly, guys, this is a big topic. This is already a pretty long script, and we've got more to cover. So I'm going to go a little faster through this part. I'm not going to get too bogged down. But the relationship between the two sons of Prince Baelon Targaryen, Viserys and Daemon, is very important. And there's a couple of key moments that drive them apart that do seem suspicious. And most notably, I'm talking about this event that we hear where Daemon supposedly makes a cruel, mocking jape at Viserys' expense after his wife Aemma Arryn dies in childbirth in 105 AC, along with their son. And this, of course, Viserys only has the daughter Rhaenyra. He's hoping for a son. His wife Aemma gives birth to a son. It's this happy thing, but then Aemma and the kid both die, so it turns extremely sad and tragic. So we're told by the Maesterly narrative of Fire and Blood that Daemon, quote, oh, and I've got this one, this will be Exhibit F. F, there you are, F.
Who was observed in a brothel on the street of Silk, making drunken japes with his high-born cronies about the heir for a day. When word of this got back to the king, legend says that it was the whore sitting in Daemon's lap who informed on him, but evidence suggests it was actually one of his drinking companions, a captain in the gold cloaks eager for advancement. Viserys became livid.
So in other words, there's a bit of the old game of telephone happening here potentially. I mean, who's to say how much difference there was between whatever Daemon said and what was reported to Viserys? Context is everything, after all. You know? And who made sure to bring the news to the king as soon as possible, while he was still in his immediate grief? If we buy the premise that the Maesters had cause to drive Daemon away from Viserys, and I definitely would buy that premise, this is definitely an event they could have influenced or even created. So let me just, I talked about this in the first video, but the whole point of Old Town is that they fear the Targaryens because the Targaryens are uncontrollable, and the dragons give them a force multiplier that they can use in battle that no one else can match. So they are above the law in a way that other people are not. And the thing that they fear the most are the truly wild Targaryens, people like Daemon. Daemon is the epitome of someone that the Maesters cannot control and are afraid of. He does whatever he wants. If he wants to take a dragon egg and give it to his concubine, he will. If he wants to declare himself king of the Narrow Sea, and he will. So you get the idea. You know, he may have messed around with Rhaenyra. Obviously, there's a whole thing with that. We'll talk about that in a second. Point is, if Old Town is conspiring here, if they're trying to control the king, if they're trying to surround him with their advisors, Daemon is the biggest thorn in the side of all of these plans. So driving a wedge between Viserys and Daemon is kind of at the top of the list of things to do on the Maester conspiracy list. That's the idea. So I just want to make sure we're on the same page. So in response to this insult, heir for a day, Viserys makes Rhaenyra his official heir, which had the effect of displacing Daemon, who had been understood to be next in line after Viserys up until that point, based on the idea that a woman can't inherit the Iron Throne. So Viserys is the firstborn son of Baelon, who was the heir. So when Baelon dies, Viserys was named the heir. That means Viserys' younger brother, Daemon, is next in line for the throne until Viserys has a son. But he's so mad at Daemon, and he just had a son, but his son died. And then, so this is the reason why Daemon made a mocking jape, is because Baelon having a son would have displaced Daemon as the heir. So when the son died, Daemon's like, oh, well, I'm still the heir. He was heir for a day. It's me again now. And so Viserys is like, oh, yeah? You know, he throws in the double bird and he's like, well, Rhaenyra is the heir and you can piss off. So this is how Rhaenyra is made the official heir. This is when it happens. Daemon quits the City Watch in response, and he was in charge of the City Watch at this time, and bounces to Dragonstone with his paramour, Mysaria, the so-called Misery the White Worm. And after getting her pregnant on Dragonstone, Daemon gives Mysaria a dragon's egg. And here Fire and Blood tells us that, quote, in this he again went too far and woke his brother's wrath. King Viserys commanded him to return the egg, send his whore away, and return to his lawful wife, or else be attainted as a traitor. Because remember, Daemon is married to Rhea Royce in the Vale, but they never liked each other. Seems like a political marriage, or maybe just a marriage that went sideways right away. So he doesn't hang out in the Vale. They're basically estranged. And we'll talk about Rhea's death later. Real quick, though, I got a PayPal from Amanda Robinson, no question, just supporting the program donation. Thank you. I appreciate that, Amanda. And anyone else who ever sends me PayPals. Every time it gives me a smile, and I'm like, people love me. They appreciate what I do. So it's a great way to make me smile and show appreciation if you want to. But in any case, Viserys commanded Daemon to return the egg that he gave Mysaria, or be attainted a traitor. So this is Viserys putting his foot down here a little bit. We don't know if that's all Viserys or if that's partly him being advised. Because, like I said, who would have influenced Viserys on these decisions? Naming Rhaenyra heir and ordering Daemon to give the egg back. His two closest advisors at this time were Sir Otto and Grand Maester Runciter, both of whom had every motivation to counsel Viserys in the direction of the decisions that he made, basically in an anti-Daemon fashion. And Sir Otto, he was actually openly against Daemon from the beginning. We're told that flat out. And that brings us to yet another event that seems like Old Town trying to drive a wedge. Oh, I guess I should, we didn't rate that one. So my narrative was so smooth, I just segued right into the next thing. So this incident where this insult that Daemon says that's passed back to the king, what would you call that? Do you think there was any maesterly involvement? Did they perhaps pay off? Like it's said it was either the sex worker that was sitting on his lap or someone in the gold cloak. So do you think the maesters were the ones to pay that reward? Were they the ones to make sure that was carried to the king? Because think about it. If the king is sealed off in his apartment crying his face off because he just lost his wife and son, it's his advisors outside the apartments that are going to be sort of handling some crazy dude that runs up from the gold cloaks and be like, I just heard Daemon say some fucked up shit. Right? Like somebody's got to decide whether or not to go knock on the door and tell Viserys about it, right? Like, if that's probably the kind of thing that a good advisor would be like, would note it down, but not bring up right away. So, I don't know. I'm calling it like maybe a 6. I think Daemon definitely said something here. So, it's really just a matter of the maesters capitalizing on Daemon having given this insult, playing it up perhaps, making sure Viserys hears it as soon as possible. Bo Baratheon, 10. This is all the maesters. I appreciate you, Bo. I appreciate you. Oh, that's a good point, Kartik Katana. Yeah, as if anyone would believe... I'm using the word sex worker. They use the W word. But, a sex worker from Flea Bottom, like, they're going to let her near the castle. Like, think about her. The first person she encounters is going to be some guardsman at the Red Keep. And she's going to be like, in her Cockney accent or whatever. I saw Daemon giving an insult. What I did? Oh, I'm sorry. Terrible. You know what I'm saying, though? Like, this is not believable that someone like that is going to be believed and taken into the Red Keep and be like, oh, yeah, tell us more. So the idea that this was overheard, yeah, it does make more sense. The gold cloak one does. But the thing is, we've actually got a suspect in the gold cloak. So let me keep reading, and we'll give a little more information on this incident, because I've written this in a messy fashion. Sorry. So let's see here. So like I said, yes, this brings us to another suspicious event where it seems like Old Town is trying to drive a wedge between Viserys and Daemon. And that would be Sir Otto having successfully convinced Viserys to oust Daemon from not one, but two small council positions, Master of Coin and Master of Laws. This eventually led to Daemon being named Captain of the City Watch, which of course Daemon turned to his advantage. He transformed the kind of crappy City Watch into the Gold Cloaks. He armed them, and now as the captain of 2,000 newly upgraded Gold Cloaks, Daemon has gained a lot more political power, and this makes him even more of a threat to Old Town. But the idea that Sir Otto is succeeded in getting him stripped of two different positions on the small council, it just shows you, like, it could be personal animus on the part of Sir Otto, but there's no question that Sir Otto is trying to drive Daemon and Viserys apart. The question is Old Town behind it as part of this conspiracy? That's how I'd frame it. Got a super chat from Jake Moss. No question, just a super chat. Jake, if you had meant to attach a question, feel free to follow up and I will snag it. Appreciate that, buddy. The Mighty Monarch celebrates 9 months of squisherdom. Wow, thank you, Mighty Monarch. I think it was drunken braggadocio and bravado exaggerated by an eager ear, the gold cloak. Yeah, that makes sense. And this is why like I said, as much as I want to call everything 10 out of 10 pyramids, like, there's always a plausible story beneath it. So you can't, like, yeah, is it possible that someone sitting around and listening to Daemon boast like that thought that maybe they could turn this to their advantage? Yes, of course it is. Now, a gold cloak is more believable than a sex worker, probably. But it could be that, like I said, there's a lot of go-between either one of those people and those words reaching the ears of the king. And I think the Grand Maester, and definitely Sir Otto, would be in that chain of in-between. So the fact that it was relayed to Viserys when he was, still deep in his grief, which turned into hot anger, that's the part that's suspicious. So, thanks for chiming in there. Chiming in like a... Chiming in like a singing bowl. So, here's a great piece of evidence. This is a real exhibit here. Daemon, after he gains more power as captain of the Gold Cloaks, there's actually a letter that we have that Sir Otto wrote to his brother, who's the Lord of Old Town, the Hightower, if you will. So this will be Exhibit G. It's a good one. Here it comes.
On no account can Prince Daemon be allowed to ascend to the Iron Throne, the hand wrote his brother, Lord of Old Town. He would be a second Maegor the Cruel, or worse. It was Sir Otto's wish then that Princess Rhaenyra succeed her father. Better the realm's delight than Lord Fleabottom, he wrote. Nor was he alone in his opinion.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite pictures there. I called that one the Frown Squad. You got Harold Westerling on the left and Kristen Cole on the right. The Maester in the background. I believe that's Melos standing over Sir Otto's shoulder. And that's the kind of thing that I use. That's why I used that picture for the first Maester conspiracy video. And let me just throw it up, actually. Because, like, I feel like on a TV show, you have to tell the story visually. You can't put in little asides like, the Maester, shuffled his feet in the background or whatever. Like, you have to put them on screen and let us put it together sometimes. And the fact that And this scene is, of course, it's got the words over it, but hang on, let's see. Here we go. And I believe I've got to make myself smaller so you can see this. 1 second. Sorry, it's a little bit messy. But take a look at the picture. See, this is why I highlighted. Like, this is the moment when they're confronting Daemon as he's got this dragon egg. He's on Dragonstone. So he's either trying to leave Dragonstone with the egg for Mysaria, or he's reluctantly bringing them the egg. It's some sort of confrontation in this moment when Daemon has taken the egg to give to Mysaria, and Viserys is like, no, give it back. So these are the people that have come to confront Daemon. The Hand of the King. The guy on the left is Harold Westerling. He's the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. After him, Criston Cole, who's the other guy on the right, becomes Lord Commander. And right behind him is the Maester. So it's like, yeah, the Archmaester came to make sure shit went down a certain way. And the fact they've got him right behind old, Otto, it's good storytelling. I think this is literally what's going on with the Maesters behind the Hightowers, using the might of the Kingsguard to contain Daemon and the dragons. So, yes, the Maester is the frowniest. That's why I called it the Frown Squad. So, there you go. And let me put my screen back together. There we go. Ah, yes. So, yeah, the letters kind of says, Otto's like, on no account can he be allowed to ascend to the Iron Throne. He would be a second Maegor the Cruel. So this kind of tells you, on no account, what does that mean? That means, like, we have to do what we have to do. If we have to kill people, if I have to use my daughter as a political tool, if I've got to poison some people, like, whatever. We cannot allow Daemon to become the king. So this is a big piece of evidence here. This tells you at least that Sir Otto is willing to go the distance. And, he's going for speed on this coup. The question is, how does the Lord of Hightower receive this letter? How quickly does he show it to his conspirators in the conclave? And so on. So this eventually culminates in Viserys naming Rhaenyra the heir, after the insult, of course. But the point is that the Old Town faction was openly against Daemon from the start, and it's not conspiratorial to speak of them trying to drive a wedge between Viserys and Daemon. The only question is, why did they do it? Did they pay off the sex worker or the gold cloak? Did they give the reward, like I said? Did they bear the tale to the king? And were they involved also in any of the other Daemon-Viserys events, such as this entire incident with Rhaenyra and Criston Cole, and some amount of sex or sex training or whatever the hell happened there? We don't know. We're going to have to see. So even if they didn't provoke that incident, again, they may have made sure that Viserys found out. They may have made sure that Daemon and Rhaenyra were caught in the act. That's a suspicious part. Like, how were Daemon and Rhaenyra caught? Somebody informed, somebody spied, somebody told somebody else, and then somebody sent some Kingsguard down to catch him. Who advised Viserys on how to handle the matter, where he sends Daemon into exile? Again, Sir Otto, the Grand Maester. So, overall, if we're talking about Daemon and Viserys' feud and Old Town's involvement in it, I'm calling that 9 out of 10. So, give me a pyramid rating for the entire Daemon Viserys relationship, as far as, do you think the Maesters were trying to drive a wedge as a part of the conspiracy? Talk Studios wants to blame Bran. We're not here to blame Bran. We're only here to blame the Maesters. So the next event we're going to go to is the death of Queen Aemma and the making of Queen Alicent. So I've already referred to Aemma's death, but let's talk about it in particular. So Old Town has essentially maintained the handship from one king to the next, from Jaehaerys to Viserys. Sir Otto is still the hand. So wouldn't it be great if Alicent could maybe get close to the new king as well, just as she was close to Jaehaerys. Well, that is, of course, exactly what happens. Alicent marries Viserys and becomes Queen Alicent. But first, we have the inconvenient issue of Viserys' first wife, Aemma Arryn, who herself is actually half Targaryen. And here I will bring to you Exhibit H.
Thus did matters stand in King's Landing late in the year 105 AC, when Queen Aemma was brought to bed in Maegor's holdfast and died whilst giving birth to the son that Viserys Targaryen had desired for so long. The boy, named Baelon after the king's father, survived her only by a day, leaving king and court bereft.
And that's actually the part of the narrative where then it cuts to and says, except for Daemon, who was overheard to say heir for a day in the Street of Silk. But in any case, Aemma is only 23 at the time. And Facundo G is celebrating 2 months of membership. Squisherdom. 2 months of squisherdom. And you can see on the left the squisher icon. Unfortunately, when I paste the comment in, it doesn't show the squisher icon. However, if I were to expand this, oh no, I'd have to blow it up. I can do that too, though. See, he's got a squisher icon next to his name. It's got a picture of a train on it. It says, I choose you. Yeah, same vibes. Anyway. So Emma's 23. Now, this is potentially a suspicious death. We're told in Fire and Blood that Aemma, quote, had suffered several miscarriages and the death of one son in the cradle over the course of her marriage, but never mentions anything about her having difficulties giving birth. Like, there's a couple of women, they have hard childbirths, like Elia Martell. After her second kid, the maesters are like, she shouldn't try to have any more kids. It'd be dangerous. There's nothing like that with Aemma. She has miscarriages. One of her sons dies in the cradle, and she also had given birth to Rhaenyra, of course, who was born normally and healthy and all that stuff. So there's nothing said about Aemma having a complicated pregnancy or anything. It's very short. It's just, she died in childbirth. So sad. Anyway, next, on to the next thing. Who's Viserys gonna marry? So it's a little bit of suspicion as far as just the threadbare narrative there. It's just, and then the queen died mysteriously, and Viserys was single again. I don't know. So this is a little bit like Prince Baelon's death of a burst belly. There's not a lot of hard evidence of foul play, except that the maesters are there. They're in charge of healthcare, so they're present at the scene of the death. And the main thing is that there's very clear political motivations for the maesters to have done the deed. That's the main thing. But of course, you can't convict just on a motive. So this kind of 5, 6 out of 10 pyramids, Emma's young and in the prime of life, but of course, women can die in childbirth for different reasons. And it was more common in the ancient world. There's a lot of women that die in childbirth, like Laena. Laena wasn't killed by the maesters, we don't think. Maybe she was, I don't know. Maybe that's a theory, I don't know. But I'd say, probably 6 out of 10. The maesters would have wanted Aemma dead before she made any Targaryen sons. That's the main thing. And they needed to get Alicent in there as soon as possible. So there's not a lot of hard evidence, but the surrounding circumstantial evidence is pointing to this event. Like, they've got to get rid of her before she has any sons. And here she dies giving birth to a son. So I don't know. I might even call this 7 out of 10. But like I said, it's all based on the motive, because she very easily just could have died in childbirth too. Let's see here. Now, this brings us to a little bit of a suspicious bit of writing, something that seems like it could be a maesterly alibi. So check this out. This will be Exhibit I for incriminating.
Though Princess Rhaenyra had been proclaimed her father's successor, there were many in the realm, at court and beyond it, who still hoped that Viserys might father a male heir, for the young king was not yet 30. Grand Maester Rhaenyra was the first to urge his grace to remarry, even suggesting a suitable choice, the Lady Laena Velaryon, who had just turned 12.
There were those who hoped Viserys might sire another child. One with a penis, preferably. That's kind of what they're saying, but yes. So it goes on to say, Laena had inherited the beauty of old Valyria, and how she was this fiery young dragon rider who had already claimed the mighty Vaegon. So she's 12, obviously medieval court politics. As soon as people have hit puberty, they're like, marry him. And that's problematic or uncomfortable in our own modern times, of course. But the reason why they're saying she's a suitable choice is because she's from House Velaryon. It's mainly a political thing. But also, she's claimed a Vagar. She looks like a Valyrian. So it's, the sort of trappings of power are all there. That's kind of the point. Presumably, so there are a couple of instances, just in case you're curious, where, when people are married at a younger age, like Jaehaerys and Alicent, for example, they'll wait a couple years to, quote, consummate the marriage or to try to get pregnant. So don't necessarily think that... and there's also debate, like Emma Aaron's mother is one of Jaehaerys' daughters, who is not very robust in her whole life. She's always in poor health. And she dies in childbirth. And the maesters worry that she was wedded and bedded too young. So there is a little bit of a debate about what age women should start trying to get pregnant at. But it is medieval society. So obviously a lot of this is very different than how society is now, to say the least. Obviously you guys are adults. You understand the difference and all that, but just don't want to sail by that without giving a comment. So now here's the thing. The fact that it was Grand Maester Rhaenyra who urged Viserys to remarry is obviously suspicious, right? I mean, it doesn't take long. Viserys ends up remarried to Alicent less than a year after Emma dies. So it says that Grand Maester Rhaenyra urged Viserys to remarry. That's suspicious, but then it throws us off a bit by telling us that Rhaenyra recommended Laena Velaryon. By taking the girl to wife, the king could heal the rift that had grown up between the Iron Throne and Driftmark, Rhaenyra pointed out. Now, this would have been a good idea for preventing this civil war. If you reconcile Velaryon to the throne, you're healing some of the tension that eventually leads to the war. This is why I don't believe this. Basically, it says, here. Like I said, if they had married Laena, if Viserys had married Laena, this would have created peace between the two factions. That would ruin the plan for a civil war. So then we get this part, and this is the fishiest part. This is like Exhibit I-2 or whatever, but yeah.
Viserys the First Targaryen was not the strongest-willed of kings, it must be said. Always amiable and anxious to please, he relied greatly on the counsel of the men around him, and did as they bade more often than not. In this instance, however, his grace had his own notion, and no amount of argument would sway him from his course. He would marry again, yes, but not to a 12-year-old girl, and not for reasons of state. Another woman had caught his eye. He announced his intention to wed Lady Alicent of House Hightower, the clever and lovely 18-year-old daughter of the king's hand, the girl who had read to King Jaehaerys as he lay dying.
And we're back. So, the only time Viserys ever stood up for his own wishes and made a strong decision, it was to marry the foremost princess of the conspirators. Maybe. Maybe. Or maybe Sir Otto was in the perfect position to make sure Alicent was always close to Viserys, and that other potential queens were not. And this would go all the way back to when they first came to court, and Alicent was attending to Jaehaerys, even if there wasn't hanky-panky going on between Jaehaerys and Alicent, which is probably unlikely. It could have been that there was something already going on with Viserys and Alicent, or at the very least, that Alicent was becoming familiar to Viserys, someone that he knew. Because when you're the king, when you're a celebrity, like, it's hard to trust people. Like me, I'm a big YouTube celebrity. I can't trust anyone anymore. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Sort of. To be honest, if you gain any little bit of power or notoriety, there are people who will try to use you for your perceived, even if you're just a Y-level YouTube celebrity. Anyways, you know how this works. So, the point is, if Alicent is attending Jaehaerys, Viserys is already going to be familiar with her. She's already going to feel like one of the family or whatever. So when Emma Arryn dies, Alicent is already close to Viserys. She already knows him. She's already right there. So that's what I mean when she's like, oh, she's close to Viserys. She's in position. So, and Sir Otto also could have definitely played keep away. You know, any other young princesses or daughters of High Lords that other people might have brought to court and put near Viserys, very easily Sir Otto could have figured out a way to, you know, keep them away. So, Mushroom, who's the one who suggests that Alicent and Jaehaerys were doing more than reading, also claims that Viserys and Alicent may have been sleeping together before Emma died. Now, we don't know if that's true, but it could be that the Maesters included this claim to make us think that Viserys was genuinely hot for Alicent and not manipulated into choosing her, because that's what they'd be trying to obscure. You know, Viserys marrying Alicent, let's be clear, it's great for the conspiracy, obviously. I mean, it's really good. It's even better than having Sir Otto's hand, okay? Or at least as good. Goes right along with it as a chaser. So what they'd be trying to obscure is the idea that Viserys was advised to marry Alicent. So they're like, oh yes, we tried to tell him to marry Laena Velaryon, which in retrospect would have prevented the war, but he didn't listen. No, he was hot for Alicent. In fact, he may have been sleeping with Alicent for years already, and he wouldn't be balked, and so he married Alicent. And so that's, to me, this whole narrative just reeks of suspicion. But let me not beat the dead horse. I'll move on here. It says, there's more. The narrative also throws out that some people suspected Otto had done just that, brought his daughter to court to put her in front of Viserys. But again, I think the Maesters may be using Otto's ambition as a cover for the conspiracy, meaning that the Maesters know that people think Otto did this, and they would like very much for those people to come to the conclusion that Otto's naked ambition was the reason, as opposed to any sort of, you know, Maester conspiracy. That's crazy. Conspiracy. We just do science here. So, I'd also like to point out that the idea that Viserys married Alicent not for reasons of politics, but for love, is very dubious. Kings rarely marry for love, and the Hightowers are very... Sorry, sometimes you get Cleo feathers stuck in your beard randomly. They just sort of float around in the air. All right, like I said, kings rarely marry for love, and the Hightowers are an extremely political choice. So this kind of reeks of cover-up, meaning this might be meant to diminish the obvious political implications of the choice and the potential truth that Viserys was encouraged to marry Alicent by Grand Maester Runciter, not Laena as is claimed. But this is just my speculation. So the most important thing here is that because he didn't choose Laena, House Velaryon is passed over again. So now they're getting even more mad. Corlys was already massing ships before to press Rhaenyra's claim, or Laenor's claim, Rhaenys' claim. So now Laena's passed over for the chance to be queen, which would put Corlys's grandchildren on the throne. And that's what you want to do if you're an old lord, if you're an old guy lord in Westeros, you want to get your grandchildren on the throne. So that's what Otto's trying to do too. So we had two, and by the way, the Velaryons are so pissed, they don't even come to the wedding of Viserys and Alicent. It's a very notable absence. So in other words, we have two very potentially different outcomes here. Viserys either marries Laena, heals up the wounds between the two major dragon-riding Targaryen bases of power, and much of the tension that leads to the war is eliminated, or Viserys marries Alicent of House Hightower, and further transforms Viserys into a puppet king of Old Town. Velaryon is also further alienated from the crown, whilst possessing Vaegar, the biggest dragon in the land, as well as Sea Smoke, Laenor Velaryon's dragon. And, best of all, Alicent can begin creating a third family of Targaryen dragon riders to cause even more chaos. So this is a huge difference. We take the Rhaenyra, Viserys crown faction and the Velaryons who have dragons, and we tie them together, and now everyone's happy, except for Daemon. He's the only one on the outside. But instead, the Valyrian dragon riders are alienated. Daemon is alienated. Rhaenyra is still sitting right there. And now the Hightowers are starting a new family of dragon lords with Viserys. So that's like, now it's a huge mess. It's just such a difference in outcomes between marrying Alicent and marrying Laena. So it's a major fork in the road. It's very suspicious. So as we know, the kingdom walked through door number 2, and the maesters may have covered their tracks by saying, oh yes, we suggested Laena. But Viserys, he's just so stubborn, so willful, so stubborn, just this once, you know? So I'm calling this a 9 out of 10. You guys tell me what you think. You know, basically the question is simply, did the Old Town faction do it because they were power hungry, or did the maesters take a hand as well? But to me, I think they did. And the fishy smelling alibi in the narrative, and Runciter being the one to urge Viserys to remarry as soon as possible. Then we throw in the conveniently timed and moderately suspicious death of Emma Arryn, and it really just seems like Old Town is essentially barreling forward with the conspiracy that they launched into action when Jaehaerys was old and vulnerable. And now they're encircling the new king, Viserys, with their allies just as fast as they can. 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. Yep, you guys are on the right page here. And we've got 237 watching, so make sure you click the like button, folks. Most of you have. Thank you very much. So most importantly, this is a key event in setting up any kind of Targaryen civil war. Perhaps they had been thinking previously to pit Daemon against Rhaenyra, or perhaps one or both of them against the Velaryons, but this is way better. Alicent is now in a great position to create some half Targaryen, half Hightower dragon riders who instantly become rival heirs to Rhaenyra and Daemon. And Velaryon is still on the outside looking in. So now we got 4 different factions. And every child that Viserys and Alicent birth moves Daemon further down the line, with their first child being a son who they name Aegon, which is a very clear statement of ambition. So now there is another choice for the throne who isn't a woman. aka Rhaenyra, or someone Old Town fears, aka Daemon. And Viserys continuing to insist that Rhaenyra is his heir is actually optimal, because it goes against the precedent of the Great Council, and therefore it can potentially be set aside after Viserys' death to provoke a succession crisis, which is exactly what happens. And all of this starts with marrying Viserys to Alicent. So really, this is a total cornerstone of the conspiracy. And much like the Great Council, the story of how Alicent becomes queen will be a key thing to watch for on House of the Dragon. So there you go. All right, so here we go. Yeah, we've got a nice. I need to get the tea brewing again, and I've got a nice quote coming up here. So this next section is going to be about the Strongs. This will be a short section, but we got to talk about the Strongs for a minute. So I'm not sure if they're involved in the conspiracy or not. However, they do have links to Old Town. They do play interesting roles in King's Landing, and there's a very suspicious fire that kills them. So, this is their arrival at court. Let me pull up the evidence. This will be, it's going to be K? Yes.
Not long after Sir Criston donned his white cloak, King Viserys invited Lionel Strong, Lord of Harrenhal, to join the small council as Maester of Laws. A big man, burly and balding, Lord Strong enjoyed a formidable reputation as a battler. Those who did not know him oft took him for a brute, mistaking his silence and slowness of speech for stupidity. This was far from the truth. Lord Lionel had studied at the Citadel as a youth, earning 6 links of his chain before deciding that a maester's life was not for him. He was literate and learned, his knowledge of the laws of the 7 kingdoms exhaustive. Thrice wed and thrice a widower, the Lord of Harrenhal brought 2 maiden daughters and 2 sons to court with him. The girls became handmaids to Princess Rhaenyra, whilst their elder brother, Sir Harwin Strong, called Breakbones, was made a captain in the Gold Cloaks. The younger boy, Larys the Clubfoot, joined the king's confessors.
All right, well, that's interesting. Obviously, the part about Lionel having studied in Old Town and having earned 6 links of chain, which means he was there for a few years at least, that catches our eye. And that could be nothing. Or it could be the basis for an avenue of communication or leverage between the Citadel and House Strong. So House Strong might not be in on the entire conspiracy, but there might be a relationship here that Old Town can exploit to pull the strings on certain events and to gather information. That's mostly what I'm thinking about here. So, because of course, if you're running a conspiracy, you don't want all the pawns that you're using to know the whole plan. You want just the opposite. So the thing is that Viserys wouldn't have made the choice to appoint a new hand without taking advice from his small council. We are already told he relies on his advice and he does what they say most of the time. And it's likely that Grand Maester Runciter would have advised Viserys to choose Lord Strong for the Master of Laws because he may have known him from Old Town, or he would know other maesters that were in Old Town when Lionel was forging those links on his chain. So he would have been able to give a strong recommendation, be like, oh yeah, Lionel's strong, he's brilliant, he knows the law really well, he's really smart, don't misjudge him, he looks like a brute, but he forged 6 links of his chain, he'd be a great Master of Laws. So it's like, oh, okay, that sounds good. So point is, it makes for an easy pitch and a good pitch. Yeah, he's a bit of a half-maester, exactly, to use that term. And in particular, it's said that, he knows the law really well. So then we have the placement of his children. And they're scattered across various institutions in King's Landing. His daughters are now Rhaenyra's handmaidens. That's a well-established role for spying, of course. So they're close to Rhaenyra, like very close. His son Larys joins the king's confessors and eventually works his way up to Master of Whisperers. Not sure if that's a strategically useful position for Old Town to be able to influence, leave a comment below. Let me know what you think. Yeah. And then his other son, Harwin, becomes a captain in the Gold Cloaks, where he can presumably keep an eye on Daemon. So you see why I raise suspicion here. Like, they come to King's Landing, and all of Lionel's children land in just the most interesting places, don't they? So now recall back to the line about some evidence suggests it was actually one of his drinking companions, Daemon's drinking companions, a captain in the Gold Cloaks eager for advancement, who reported his quip about Emma Arryn dying to Viserys. So I believe that the Strongs are already in King's Landing at that point. So, yeah, in fact, they were. So that could have been Harwin himself who informed on Daemon to get him in trouble. Because, of course, Harwin was courting Rhaenyra at this time. That's right. This is all happening at the same time. So Harwin could have potentially... Everyone knows that Daemon and Rhaenyra were close. This is when Daemon was visiting King's Landing, bringing Rhaenyra gifts. She was like 14 or something like that, 15. Everyone knows she's going to be married in a couple years, and so everyone's trying to vie for her hand. There's a long list of suitors that's given. Harwin Strong is one of them. So this is before the affair and all that. So Harwin may have been either the Gold Cloak that informed on Daemon, or he may have told a buddy to inform, said, given him the information, given him some gold to do it so that it wasn't Harwin himself, but he could have been involved in it. That's what I suspect. And of course, it wasn't long after this that Rhaenyra had that falling out with Criston Cole on the eve of her marriage to Laenor, and then first sleeps with Harwin. So this all happens in rapid succession here. And Daemon gets exiled again, after this incident. I guess we're talking about the first time he was exiled after the insult about heir for a day. So we'll just have to see who's involved in catching Daemon and Rhaenyra in the act, and who's involved in reporting Daemon's insult back to Viserys, if the Strongs are involved in either one of those. It should also be noted that Lord Lionel, who had been made Hand of the King by this time, had urged Viserys to put Daemon to death. And I'm sure Old Town would have liked nothing better than that, right? I mean, they had plenty of other Dragon Lords to start a war with, and Daemon would have been the one they feared the most. So, as to Lionel becoming Hand of the King, that happens in 109 AC. Sir Otto apparently pushed Viserys too far on the matter of succession, and then Viserys stripped him of his chain of office and named Lionel Strong the Hand in his place. So here again, we have to fill in the gaps with logical assumptions, because Viserys never does anything without advice. Grand Maester Runsitter's right there. So once again, just as he probably gave advice to Viserys to nominate Lionel to Master of Laws, he probably again urged to promote him to Hand of the King. And Viserys would have already been relying on Lionel's competence, so that would have made sense. But what this means is that Old Town may have been able to swap in one hand for another that they still had influence over, if there is a Lionel Maester line of connection. So what do you guys think? I called this 6 out of 10. I don't think Lionel knows about the conspiracy, but this Old Town connection kind of stinks. And his son is the Master of Whisperers, and his daughters are... Actually, let's call this a 7 out of 10. That's my opinion. But what do you guys think? And I gotta pour my tea. I'm gonna play you some Reading Rhaegar music. And then I'm gonna pour my tea. And if you've got no idea what you just saw, that's a bit of a running gag that I do where I dress up like Rhaegar when I do reading. And the joke is that I've got Rhaegar in a second bedroom here. He lives here. He's hiding from King Robert. And he reads, that's all he does is read, the Gnostic Bible and Madame Blavatsky. He's into some weird shit, to be honest. But yeah, so he does my voiceovers sometimes. That's reading Rhaegar. Of course, Rhaegar is a musician. There's no harp. There's only a bass here, so he plays a bass. And yeah, you can put your own lyrics in there. There's, Way Up in the Sky. I think I'm Azor High. I've got lyrics, but for now it's just all bass. Maybe there'll be a singing version at some point. But yes, that's how we do it here. Yep, take a look. It's in old books. Reading Rhaegar. That's it. You got the idea. So skipping ahead to 120 AC, we come to the fire at Harrenhal, not the one that Aegon the Conqueror set. Another fire. So to try to quell rumors of Harwin... So to try to quell the rumors of Harwin Strong having fathered Rhaenyra, because again, we're skipping ahead to 120. Rhaenyra's having children with Laenor. They all look like Strongs. People are talking. So one of the things Viserys does to try to combat these rumors, which are very serious, of course, is he sends Harwin away from Rhaenyra. Sends Harwin back to Harrenhal. Now, the thing is, his father, Lionel Strong, Hand of the King, and by now Viserys' most trusted advisor and seemingly a friend, decides to accompany his son back to Harrenhal. And shortly after returning to their family seat, a fire breaks out in the tower where Lionel and Harwin are sleeping, killing both of them along with 3 of their retainers and a dozen servants. Now, apparently this fire sounded as suspicious to everyone at the time as it does to us now. It only broke out in their chamber, and it only killed them and their servants. So Fire and Blood goes on a little bit of a gallivant, sort of launching all sorts of theories at us to consider. So check this out. This is a pretty great piece of evidence, if you will. And this will be L. Exhibit L. That's how deep we are.
The cause of the fire was never determined. Some put it down to simple mischance, whilst others muttered that Black Heron's seat was cursed and brought only doom to any man who held it. Many suspected the blaze was set intentionally. Mushrooms suggest that the sea snake was behind it as an act of vengeance against the man who had cuckolded his son. Septon Eustace, more plausibly, suspects Prince Daemon, removing a rival for Princess Rhaenyra's affections. Others have put forth a notion that Larys Clubfoot might have been responsible. With his father and elder brother dead, Larys Strong became the Lord of Harrenhal. The most disturbing possibility was advanced by none other than Grand Maester Mellos, who muses that the king himself might have given the command. If Viserys had come to accept that the rumors about the parentage of Rhaenyra's children were true, he might well have wished to remove the man who had dishonored his daughter, lest he somehow reveal the bastardry of her sons. Were that so, Lionel Strong's death was an unfortunate accident, for his lordship's decision to see his son back to Harrenhal had been unforeseen.
So yeah, the music is getting spookier as the conspiracy progresses. So perhaps the Maesters are right here. Perhaps Viserys did this ghastly deed. The motivation was there, and because the rumors about Rhaenyra and Harwin, they're very serious. It amounts to treason, and it has a very high potential to destabilize the realm. It also means that Viserys would have to punish Rhaenyra, because Rhaenyra is the one who's committing treason, technically. So Rhaenyra would have to be disinherited, potentially banished. Some would call for her execution. It's a big deal. So potentially Viserys could have done something this out of character for him, if you will, because it was that important. Because usually he dithers and just pretends everything is fine and tries to pacify everyone. So this is out of character if Viserys did this. But consider, it's Grand Maester Mellos and the Maesters who compile Fire and Blood who are trying to direct our attention to Viserys. or just trying to direct our attention, period. So perhaps we should turn our attention back on the maesters. Perhaps Melos advised Viserys to do this, or facilitated it. I mean, Viserys, he doesn't have connections directly in the realm. He's not the Lord of Fleabottom, so he's not in a position to pull this off. He would rely on other people to pull this off completely. Now, the primary benefit for Old Town in all this is that Viserys is once again alone and in need of counsel, and specifically he needs a strong hand, and ends up recalling Sir Otto Hightower from Old Town. That's right. It's not very creative, Viserys. And by any means, that's a win for the coup plotters. You would definitely want Otto in King's Landing by the time that Viserys dies. And at this point, Viserys is 43. He's overweight. He's afflicted by a lot of health issues. And he ends up dying 9 years later. So, what do you guys think? On the hey girl Nettles, we're rating the suspicious events of the run up to Fire and Blood on a 1 to 10 pyramid scale of maesterly involvement. So the fire at Harrenhal that killed the Strongs. What do we think? I'm calling it an 8 out of 10. It's obviously foul play. The question is only who done it and why. Now, we don't know enough about Corlys Velaryon to know if this is his kind of work, but it doesn't seem like it. Daemon is certainly ruthless, and he may have wanted Harwin dead. Perhaps this is a Rhaenyra rivalry thing. Maybe if Harwin was the one who informed on him, earlier, then perhaps Daemon is taking revenge against Harwin. That could be. I do think that's possible. In fact, that's very possible. But Daemon's connections, here's the thing. Daemon's connections are in King's Landing, in Fleabottom, amongst the Gold Cloaks. So I'm not sure he could have arranged something at Harrenhal. So I think it was either Viserys or the Maesters. And if the answer is Viserys, then the answer is still the Maesters, because we know Viserys tends to do everything on his advisors, on the advice of his advisors, and couldn't have pulled this off himself. So, at the end of all this, Sir Otto is the hand again. So what do you guys think? Just got a super chat about ice dragons. Are they real or are they myth? I do think they're real, just because I think George clearly likes them. And who can control them? It would only be like the Great Other or something like that. Probably. But maybe transformed John could do it. I don't know. Check out the John of the Crypts video. I think I got into that topic there. Let me go back to see. Did I miss another super chat? Yes, from EM. Thank you. It was a sticker. My hero. Well, I'm happy to be of service. This tea should be good. All right. So yeah, this is a good point is raised by Dihana. This is a pretty tricky thing to pull off, this fire. Like, you've got to have people in Harrenhal that could have set this fire. And every Harrenhal would have had a maester. So the maester that was in Harrenhal is somebody that could have hired your stable hand, your cat's paw assassin type person to start the fire. That's kind of how this would go. Isabel says she thinks the maesters convinced Larry Strong, who plotted with Alice Rivers, a witch, to use her fire magic to work the plot. Wow, okay, I didn't think of that. That's definitely a couple steps more conspiratorial than I was imagining. In fact, I haven't been thinking about magic much at all, and we probably should, because House of the Dragon will want to bring in a little bit of magic. You notice my Sarya's got the Weirwood dress, so she's going to have some magic, probably. Alice Rivers is obviously a magician. Nettles is a fire witch by the end of it, so, So Nettles is asking the question, Girl Nettles in the chat, who gained the most from hiding the strong parentage? Well, it would probably, like I said, it's Viserys and Rhaenyra. They're the ones. Viserys particularly is one I would think. But I also think the Maesters might have been wanting to keep this thing on a simmer. Like, you remember when Illyrio and Varys are plotting? There's a point at which Illyrio is like, hey, can you keep this thing on a simmer and not have it explode just yet? I'm not ready for this thing to boil over. So it's the same kind of thing here. Like, Alicent's children are still too young. They're not old enough to fly these dragons yet and have a real dragon fight. So they might have wanted to keep things on a boil. They don't want it, Viserys is still alive. He's not dead yet. They want him to get older and more sickly. So yeah, they're not ready for it. They need Otto back in his hand. They don't want Rhaenyra to get exposed. Because the whole point about Rhaenyra is that Rhaenyra's claim is easily set aside, both because she's a woman and because everyone thinks her children are bastards. So they want to keep that claim around. They want to prop it up so that they can declare it illegitimate and launch the coup when Viserys dies. That's the whole point. We'll start the fire. All right, so now we're on to the death. We got two more sections. The death of Rhea Royce, Laenor Velaryon, and Laena Velaryon. So, to be honest, guys, it almost seems like someone is trying to clear the deck so Daemon and Rhaenyra can marry each other. Perhaps it's fate, or perhaps the Maesters thought if they could get Rhaenyra to marry Daemon, it would make Rhaenyra's claim that much more unpalatable, right? Which it does. The fear of Daemon is actually the main argument that the Greens will use to justify their coup and to deny Rhaenyra the throne. So, yeah, I'll let you be the judge. First comes the death of Rhea Royce, Daemon Targaryen's first wife. And this will be Exhibit M. M for murder.
A year later, in 115 AC, there came a tragic mishap of the sorts that shapes the destiny of kingdoms. The bronze bitch of Runestone, Lady Rhea Royce, fell from her horse whilst hawking and cracked her skull upon a stone. She lingered for 9 days before finally feeling well enough to leave her bed, only to collapse and die within an hour of rising.
Yes, very sad. So, what was it that Varys was saying about the woods being an abattoir? A hunter lives a perilous life. If the boar had not done for Robert, it would have been a fall from a horse, or... Oh, yes, that's right. So it sounds like Rhea Royce definitely had internal hemorrhaging in her brain. That would explain the sudden collapse after rising for the first time after 9 days. But falling from your horse, that's on Varys' list. So... this has to catch our attention. Now, here's the thing. People do suggest that this was foul play. But people tend to think that it was Daemon. He obviously didn't love Rhea Royce, probably wanted to marry somebody else, maybe Rhaenyra. So, the thing is that Daemon has no connections in the Vale. He was only there for a short time, and basically everyone hates him in the Vale. He doesn't have connections there. And when he turned up to try to claim Lady Royce's lands, he was dismissed out of hand and told to F off, basically, told to piss off. So, he'd been hostile to Rhea the whole time, and basically the Royces weren't having any Peter Baelish type shit, if you know what I'm saying. So, the main reason that people suspect Daemon and Rhea's death is that he promptly turned up on Driftmark and fell in love and married Laena Velaryon, fell in love with and married Laena Velaryon, who is, of course, the daughter of Corlys, and Rhaenys, the queen who never was. And this is right after being booted from the Vale. Now, the Maesters are skeptical of that love. They say, the singers say they fell in love, but perhaps Daemon wanted to check his fall politically. But I do think, actually, the evidence points to Daemon and Laena having a genuine romance. That's my opinion. So essentially, there's not really much else to say about Rhea's death. It's suspicious mostly because it's on Varys' list of things, but there's nothing to connect it to the Maesters. So I don't know. I call this like a 5 out of 10 myself. But whatever the cause, Daemon and Rhaenyra are married now to the children of Corlys Velaryon, right? Daemon is married to Laena, and Rhaenyra is married to Laenor. So what's happened here is that this is the foundation of the Team Black faction. And so it could be that the Maesters are trying to get these guys together so they can assemble their faction and have something to oppose the Hightowers with. Because to really provoke the war, that's probably the best thing, is to have two strong dragon-riding sides that can tear each other apart. And we need to make sure the Sea Snake is in. We also need to make sure they're all involved. That's the other thing. We can't have a war start between two of them and then the Velaryons sit out with their dragons. So now, Daemon and Rhaenyra are married to the two children of Corlys and Rhaenys. And then, let's see here. And this, so now the Velaryons are involved. However, like I said, either Fate or Old Town, one or the other, apparently wanted Daemon and Rhaenyra to marry. So in 120 AC, both Laena and Laenor die in the same year, both potentially suspiciously. And so this brings us to Exhibit N.
A day and a night of labor left Laena Velaryon pale and weak, but finally she gave birth to the son Prince Daemon had so long desired. But the babe was twisted and malformed and died within the hour, nor did his mother long survive him. Her grueling labor had drained all of Lady Laena's strength, and grief weakened her still further, making her helpless before the onset of childbed fever. As her condition steadily worsened, despite the best efforts of Driftmark's young Maester, Prince Daemon flew to Dragonstone and brought back Princess Rhaenyra's own Maester, an older and more experienced man renowned for his skills as a healer. Sadly, Maester Gerardus came too late. After 3 days of delirium, Lady Laena passed from this mortal coil. She was but 27. During her final hour, it is said, Lady Laena rose from her bed, pushed away the septas praying over her, and made her way from her room, intent on reaching Vaegar that she might fly one last time before she died. Her strength failed her on the tower steps, however, and it was there that she collapsed and died. Her husband, Prince Daemon, carried her back to her bed. Afterward, Mushroom tells us, Princess Rhaenyra sat vigil with him over Lady Laena's corpse and comforted him in his grief.
And of course, I've got the names of all the artists down below. I'm using a lot of shots from the show, but to the extent I've used art, I'm always labeling the art, so you can go check it out. That last one of Laena and Vaegar is by Uma Andressa, and she's been reeling out new House of the Dragon art, so she's an awesome follow on Instagram. I think she's on Instagram. Uma Andressa. But, yeah, so Isabel raised a good point. She's calling this Rhea Royce's death an 8 because they keep blaming Daemon in their narrative or implying that Daemon is guilty for people's death when he's miles and miles away from them. So it does seem like they're using Daemon as a scapegoat. I think I pointed that out in the script a little further on, but I agree with you, Isabel. And there's a lot to talk about in that last quote. So first of all, again, Daemon, held vigil over her body. It says that Rhaenyra comforted him in his grief. We know Rhaenyra and Laena and Daemon were all friends. So this to me is genuine. And we'll have to watch it on the show. But this to me, again, it all sounds like this is genuine affection here. Like these are actually all friends. Like Daemon and Laena were close. That's just my reading of it. But in any case, they also... besides that, Daemon and Laena also take this very cool grand tour of Essos by dragon, after their wedding, which I believe they're going to show that on the show. And it just sounds romantic. I don't know. I mean, two dragon lords flying on the newlyweds, flying on the dragons, going back to the old Valyrian, daughter cities of Volantis and Lys and things like that. It sounds legit to me. But in any case, Laena and Daemon's deformed child, it's hard to say. It could be another Targaryen lizard baby. It's not specifically said to be a lizard baby. It just says malformed and twisted. And, Daemon does have an actual lizard baby with Rhaenyra years later. So Daemon might have that super reptilian Targaryen seed. Maybe that's one of the ones they want to kill off, according to the Preston Jacobs genetics theory or whatever. But the point is that it could be that Laena was poisoned. Maybe the child came out malformed because she was being poisoned by the Maester on Driftmark. Because this is the most suspicious part of the passage, is the Maester swap. Daemon flies back to Dragonstone and gets Rhaenyra's Maester. And they say, oh, well, Gerardus, he's a renowned healer, and the one on Driftmark was a young Maester. Well, that means that the one on Driftmark was new. That's what it means. And remember, the Citadel sends out the Maesters. They send you a Maester, so you don't choose. This is another great thing for the conspiracy. Like, oh, well, we need to keep an eye on Driftmark, so we'll send this new young Maester out there who's part of the plotting. He's poisoning Laena while she's pregnant. Okay? Maybe. Because the thing is, the fact that Daemon goes and gets this other Maester that's on Dragonstone, it kind of sounds like they didn't trust the Maester on Driftmark. That's what I bet we'll see in the show when Laena is sick in childbirth and Daemon and Rhaenyra are standing there and they're watching the young Maester try to save her. Can't you just see him scowling and being like, man, I don't trust this MFer. I'm going to go get Gerardus. I've known him for 25 years. I trust him. So this could be an indication that Daemon and Rhaenyra, in fact, did not trust that Maester on Driftmark. It could just be that Gerardus is a better healer, and that's all there is to it. But we're looking for the conspiracy. There's a Maesterly swap thing happening right as but he came too late. So I'm calling this one, I call it like a 6 out of 10. It's fishy, but it lacks some of the hard evidence like of the other ones, like, the vote not being released from the Great Council. And Laenor also dies in the same year, so maybe like a 7 out of 10. I don't know. What do you guys think about Laena's death? The Maesters do this one? And yeah, Laena had been betrothed to basically some loser from Essos who was just hanging around and wasn't getting the message that like he wasn't actually going to get to marry Laena. And Daemon challenged him to a duel and killed him right away as soon as he got there. But that doesn't really indicate one way or another. Like Daemon would do that if he was in love with Laena or if he was marrying her for his own political reasons. Like, it doesn't matter. He would do the same thing there. So it's a cool story, but it doesn't really sway me one way or the other. It's likely a pregnant Laena was given remedies that were supposed to be good for pregnant women, but were actually poison. Yeah, that's the thing, is it's the Maester who would be giving all the medicines and stuff. So Cinnabarb, 10 out of 10. Highly sus. So let's see here. Sorry, 1 second, guys. Let me just check on... Hey. What are we doing? Why are we throwing a tantrum? Come here, step up. Okay, so back to the lecture at hand. Laenor's death, same year, 120. This is the one that we get with the most information, and is probably the one that is the most suspicious. So a little bit of a longer quote here. These are the 2 paragraphs. I just wanted to give you all the details. So This, I believe, will be our last exhibit. This is Exhibit O.
The Lord of the Tides and his lady were still in mourning for their beloved daughter when the stranger came again to carry off their son. Sir Laenor Velaryon, husband to the Princess Rhaenyra and the putative father of her children, was slain whilst attending a fair in Spicetown, stabbed to death by his friend and companion Sir Carl Corey. The two men had been quarreling loudly before blades were drawn. Merchants at the fair told Lord Velaryon when he came to collect his son's body. Corey had fled by then, wounding several men who tried to hinder him. Some claimed a ship had been waiting for him offshore. He was never seen again. The circumstances of the murder remain a mystery to this day. Grand Maester Melos writes only that Sir Laenor was killed by one of his own household knights after a quarrel. Septon Eustace provides us with the killer's name and declares jealousy the motive for the slaying. Laenor Velaryon had grown weary of Sir Carl's companionship and had grown enamored of a new favorite, a handsome young squire of 6 and 10. Mushroom, as always, favors the most sinister theory, suggesting that Prince Daemon paid Carl Corey to dispose of Princess Rhaenyra's husband, arranged for a ship to carry him away, then cut his throat and fed him to the sea. A household knight of relatively low birth, Corey was known to have a lord's tastes and a peasant's purse, and was given to extravagant wagering besides, which lends a certain credence to the fool's version of events. Yet there was no shred of proof, then or now, though the sea snake offered a reward of 10,000 golden dragons for any man who could lead him to Sir Carl Corey, or deliver the killer to a father's vengeance.
Yeah, so the chat's just lighting up with 10 out of 10 halfway through that quote. Yeah, yeah. This is definitely foul play. It's just a matter of whether or not these guys are the ones who did it or not. But do you see why I wanted to give you that whole passage there? It's just pretty heavy. So it kind of sounds like, as we mentioned, that the Maesters are using Daemon as a scapegoat for a lot of their deeds. Oh yes, Mushroom says that Daemon maybe killed Laenor. Well, that's very believable. It's very more plausible was the idea that Daemon did it. Some say that Daemon set the fire at Harrenhal. Daemon's wife, she just fell off her horse suspiciously. Just when Daemon wanted to remarry too, which probably was a sham marriage, by the way, since he was desperate politically. So you kind of see how the slant is here in Fire and Blood. So now we don't really need Daemon's involvement to explain anything here. That's the truth. If Carl Corey was jilted and jealous, then he had the motivation to either do this on his own or, more likely, to be amenable to doing it for a price. It also could be that this whole quarrel was something that Carl provoked as a cover story, knowing his job was to kill. It's just part of the thing. Like, they got in a fight and they stabbed each other. Well, he probably provoked that fight if he was paid to kill him. So Carl Corey was quarreling with his queer friend, George. Dude, with the alliteration. Carl Corey was quarreling. He says quarrel like 3 times, too, in the passage. It's just like, all right. But the point is, where did the money come from to hire a ship? It's one thing, because it's obviously not, well, let's reverse engineer this. It's obviously not a genuine fight. Because if it was just a random fight that broke out, he doesn't have a ship waiting for him. And that detail that's thrown in there is probably true. I don't think that's thrown in there for the heck of it. So where did he get the money to have a ship hired, waiting offshore for him? That's not even like he bought passage on a ship. He's got a ship waiting like a getaway car with specific instructions. So, and it's even said he didn't have the money for that. The most suspicious thing is that he vanished without a trace, and that not even 10,000 golden dragons from the sea snake's vaults could turn up any leads. Whoever pulled this off did a very clean job, right? And this again, like, if it had been Daemon or just Carl himself hiring, these things, like, people would have informed. They would have been like, oh yeah, that asshole came and gave me a couple of coppers to look the other way. I'd like those dragons though, please, or, oh, I saw him, blah, 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 blah. But they couldn't turn up any leads. So This was pulled off seamlessly. Whoever did it, that is the most suspicious part of it. So, how many pyramids? Well, everything about this murder fits the MO of Old Town. They're using information gathered by spies, which would be the observance of Carl Corey and Laenor, and the idea that Carl could be exploited, that he had gambling debts or whatever, paying off corruptible people like Carl, hiring the ship. This is all stuff that the maesters would be really good at. So I would guess that Carl would have been poisoned or murdered at sea promptly to clean up the deed, and they suggest that Daemon did that, but I would suggest that the maesters did that. So that sounds like projection. And yeah, I would probably have to call this 9 out of 10. You know, I mean, I guess what is a 10 out of 10? If anything is, this might be. So 11 out of 10 for Cinnabarb. So Daemon and Rhaenyra married that same year in 120, and in fact, Rhaenyra was actually going into labor with her and Daemon's first son, Aegon, who would eventually sit the throne as Aegon II, called Dragonsbane. So you could also wonder if Daemon and Rhaenyra are that gangster, that they killed their own Velaryon husband and wife. But that would be hella fucked if that's the case. I hope that's not true. But we also know that Daemon and Rhaenyra have been hot for each other for a long friggin' time while they were married to other people. So it kind of does make sense that they would marry quickly. Anu says he was quarreling with his alarm. Yeah, I don't have an alarm. That's the cool thing about being a YouTuber. I just stay up till 6 a.m. and... Well, actually, no, I do have an alarm. It's Cleo. She wakes me up. What am I saying? So, the coup. The coup. This is the last thing we're going to take a look at. So, the Hightower coup, of course, is launched upon Viserys' death in 129 AC. It's primarily pulled off by 3 people. Alicent Hightower, who sealed the king's apartments after his death, prevented word from spreading, and then convened the Team Green Treason Council in her own apartments. There's Sir Otto Hightower, the hand of the king. He was officially in charge until the new king was named. He was running the treason meeting. And he, along with Alicent, of course, pushed the council to crown Aegon instead of Rhaenyra. And then lastly, Sir Criston Cole, the Kingmaker, who was the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. He's the one who convinced Aegon to take the crown, supposedly. And if Criston had opposed the Hightowers, the coup would have been dead in its tracks. They were the swords. They are the swords that's all around the royal family, so you have to have the Kingsguard on board. They're also a very important symbol of power. Trappings of power and all that. Yeah, no, they locked the apartments. They kept the body in there. They didn't ring the bells. It's just like Robert's death. It's the same thing. So, as to the coup, yes, Old Town definitely did it, in the sense that the Hightowers did it. At this point, the Maesters have already set the stage, essentially. The coup was merely waiting for Viserys' death. And of course, Mushroom suggests that Alicent may have hurried him on his way, with poison in his hippocras. But it's hard to know the truth of that since Viserys was in failing health. It's kind of neither here nor there. The Grand Maester at this time was Maester Orwyle, who's an interesting fellow. His confessions before his execution were set down by Grand Maester Munkin in his Dance of the Dragons, A True Telling. That's the main record of the dance. And yes, I said execution. Orwyle's story is actually very strange and convoluted, and his execution actually comes years later after a series of unfortunate events, as it were. So most interestingly, Maester Orwyle confesses to taking part in the plot to kill Alicent's son, Aegon II, who retook the throne at the very end of the war. Aegon was a shell of his former self, and everyone could see it. He was not long for the world. Maester Orwyle provided Larys Strong the poison that Larys Strong used to kill the king. And so this is perhaps a good reminder that all maesters are familiar with poisons, and are willing to use it for political assassination and even regicide if they think it serves a higher purpose. And that's exactly the premise behind the anti-dragon Maester conspiracy, that the Maesters very much believe in their cause of making a better world, a more stable world that doesn't rely on magic and which isn't ruled over by unpredictable and capricious dragon lords, if you will. We love our dragon lords, but they are capricious and unpredictable. So just to put the button on the coup, which of course is 10 out of 10 pyramids. I mean, it's the coup. We didn't come all this way for nothing, right? It's interesting to note that the way that Fire and Blood frames Munkkin's treating of Orwyl's confession. Fire and Blood Maesters, they say that Orwyl was eager to absolve himself of his part in the coup. He was the one present during the Team Green Treason Council. And they say that Munkkin was too eager to go along with Orwyl's sort of, letting himself off the hook through the narrative. So, for example, the Treason Council begins, supposedly, with Orwyl giving this speech about how it's, all right, well, it's time to crown Rhaenyra. I'll send a raven. Kristen, go tell the bell ringers to hit the music. And Alicent, why don't you write Rhaenyra a kindly worded letter and break her the news gently and ask her if she'd like to come be queen now. And what? Treason? That Aegon? That would be wrong. Like, it's literally written like that. It's kind of absurd, to be honest. As if the Grand Maester is going to come to that meeting with all the coup plotters and be like, all right, so let's crown Rhaenyra. Oh, what? We're not here to crown Rhaenyra? It's like, no, we're not here to crown Rhaenyra, moron. So this is not believable in the slightest. What's far more likely is that Orwyl was a coup plotter, and that's why, who's the Stark that comes in at the end in the Hour of the Wolf? It's Cregan. Cregan is the one who pronounces Orwyl a traitor and sentences him to die, and his death is just put off for several years because of various reasons. There's the winter fever comes, and a lot of maesters die, and anyone who knows how to heal is put into use. And Orwyl actually goes and heals a bunch of people during the plague. Then he's put back in jail, and he spends 2 years writing his confession. So that's how that goes. It's pretty interesting, actually. But the point is, he was judged to be, I guess he was pronounced a traitor for his part in killing Aegon II, but he was also at this treason meeting. So we don't know what part what part he had in the meeting. But what he wrote is bullshit, clearly, where he just says, oh, yes, I was about to crown Rhaenyra, but then everyone was talking about treason, and I was taken aback. Anyway, so this is also, it's a very clear example of a maester trying to absolve himself by simply writing his own alibi, okay? Now, Fire and Blood frames it that he was trying to only cover his own guilt, as opposed to the fact that he might have been a conspirator in a larger conspiracy. But what I'd like to point out is that Orwyl basically serves as a case-in-point example of what we think the Grand Maesters were doing. Participating in treason plotting meetings, using poison to commit assassinations and regicide for the greater good, and then rewriting history to absolve yourself of blame. Orwyl gives us all of that. So all I'm saying is that that's what the other maesters did too, and on a bigger scale. So there you have it. That's the coup. That's the conspiracy. Now, there are other events that we can look at, of course, during the war as well. But I think that the main thing is the provoking of the war. So there you have it, folks. Maester Conspiracy Part 2. The Warriors are going to the NBA Finals. Woo! Just had to get that out. But yeah, last call for questions, and then I'll dip out of here. It's been 2 hours and 20 minutes, so, pretty good stream here. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you for the Super Chats and PayPals. And yeah, last call for comments, remarks, observations, accusations of treason. Yeah, so Vaegon, the Targaryen who became an Archmaester, I kind of feel like George put that character in specifically to serve that purpose in the Great Council. Because it's like, oh, Jaehaerys thinks he's getting an ally, and it's actually not an ally. So Archmaester Vaegon is very unique in being a Targaryen Maester, and I feel like that's the reason why he's written into the story. So, and I am wearing my pyramid shirt. I didn't show it off, but there you go. So 10 out of 10 pyramids for this stream. Click the like. Make sure you're subscribed. And I'll have the Alicent video probably like on Wednesday, maybe. So like I said, last call for questions, and then I am dipping out to chill a little bit. New Mythic Concepts will probably be a minute. I'm going on vacation here in about a week and a half. I'm going to go to Australia for a month and hang out with Minty. I'll still do streams while I'm there, and I'll be writing the next Mythic Concepts video. I'll probably have to record it when I get back. So it'll be several weeks still. Thanks for asking, No Talk Studios. And if you didn't know, I have a second YouTube channel called Mythic Concepts, where I talk about real-world mythology. And it's doing pretty well. And speaking of doing well, we're doing well here. We are getting real close to 50,000 subs. Let's see, where are we? 49,503. So we're 497 subs away from 50,000. I'll have to celebrate that one. I guess next live stream we'll celebrate. But the Alicent video is next, so. Celtics or Heat? Man, I don't know. I was picking the Celtics, but they're starting to concern me with their ball handle. All I know is that the Warriors are going to beat either one of those teams in 5 games, maybe 6. I don't think either one of those teams has much of a shot against us, so that's my main take. Vedic Danny was an amazing video. Why, thank you. It's the one I'm the most proud of, I think, so appreciate that. Yeah, we're just about to 50, almost. So like I said, I'll do some streams from Australia, but it might be a little bit of a gap in produced videos while I hang out with my girlfriend that lives on the other side of the country. Fiance, actually. They like it when you say fiance after you give them the ring. Isn't that so? Enjoy the long flights. Yes, I'll be tapping on my keyboard about Harappans. Yeah, Warriors in 6 is probably the safe one, the safe bet. Yes, I'm going to Australia to see all the wild Cleos. That's the point. Come here, girl. Yeah. In case you guys are wondering what I'm going to do with the birds, in San Francisco, there's a cool place called the Parrot Hotel. And it's a big parrot hotel. It's a boarding house for parrots. And it's run by bird people. They feed them great and play with them every day. And the birds basically get to go be more like birds. They get to hang out in a long, stretchy, sort of 3-sectioned, warehousey kind of room. It's nicer than a warehouse, but, you know, it's like hard floors and stuff. And just tons of birds. They're all in cages. Lots of boarding birds of every kind. Every time Goose comes back from the bird. Yeah, bird people means not human animal hybrids. I mean like people that love birds. So the point is they're well cared for. They don't have that everywhere. I'm very lucky that they have that in San Francisco. So I live in Sacramento. It's about an hour and a half from San Fran, but I can drive the birds there, drop them off, and Goose will learn some new bird sounds from the other African greys who come home with some new sounds to say. So it's always fun. Yeah, bird people are more dangerous than squishers. If you're talking about like bird man. Those beaks are sharp. All right, folks, I want to wrap it up. I will see you, like I said, with an Alicent video, hopefully on Wednesday. Cheers, guys.